This is in progress. Great. So as a reminder, this is going to be mostly Q&A. Some is live, some is resubmitted. So we've got some questions that we got when you were registering. If you want to ask a question, use the Q&A feature, and you can pop it in the chat, but we will be taking the questions from the Q&A feature. We've got questions incoming on Resisting Project 2025, on what is Indivisible, what do we do, what's our plans, on community organizing and coalition building, on messaging and media, on the executive orders that have been coming out, on the DNC. We'll try to cover all of that and more. But again, if you have questions right now, put them in the chat or put them in the Q&A function. This will be recorded.
So there's literally a button that says Q&A.
Oh, right.
So if you didn't submit, we'll bounce back and forth between, we got tons of questions that came in ahead of time, but also these live questions. So if you put it in the Q&A, we're not going to be able to get to everything, but we'll try to go back and forth between. That's what we always do.
That's right. That's right. And we are going to record this. It is recording right now. We will send it out to everyone who registered. We will post links in the chat, and we are also going to follow up with them in that email that goes out to you if you registered, if you missed them here. So you can pull them from the chat, but if you miss one, don't worry, you will get it. We're going to do these every Thursday throughout, or we've been doing these every Thursday throughout January. We're seeing if there is appetite to keep them going based on how folks are engaging, what feedback we get. We do these chats in order to stay grounded, stay in touch with lots of folks across the Indivisible movement. We know there's a bunch of group leaders, group members who are on the call with us right now. I recognize some familiar names. I also see some new folks. That is great. That is our favorite balance of people.
Leah's going over this. I'm just noticing all the chat saying, please keep going.
Oh.
So just to know, the current plan is to keep going. It was a little bit experimental in January. There's been a lot of take up. The number of people coming has grown. So we will post a link to the registration for next week. And as long as you all are getting value out of this, we'll keep on doing it. So plan this same time next Thursday.
Wonderful. Okay. Now, one just quick housekeeping note. This is a lowercase d democratic space that is by its nature messy. The chat box goes really fast. We love that. Everyone here, please keep the chat box constructive. We are a diverse nationwide movement. We treat each other with respect, especially when things are hard, especially when we are scared or frustrated or looking for path forward. But that's how we organize together. So just keep it constructive, keep it friendly. Final thing I'll say in the housekeeping section, we do a survey after these sessions every time. I want to just reflect back. We asked a little bit about how things are going, what people are excited about. What we heard was folks do like the intro. Overwhelmingly, what you really want out of these chats and what your top favorite priority is specifics and action items. So message received, we will hone in on those. We also saw some folks we also coming out of the chat last week, we did a formal endorsement vote of Ben Wickler for DNC chair with our movement group leaders in our group leaders list. And I am pleased to report that the results of that were a 93%?
I think 92%.
92% vote of endorsement of Ben Wickler for DNC chair. So based on that, we issued a formal endorsement for Indivisible earlier this week. That vote is going to come up over the weekend. And so we're all rooting for Ben.
And I would just note, this group was very helpful in that. So in the last chat, we did a survey. We did a quick we called it a temperature check just to see, was there demand for us to do any kind of endorsement? Overwhelmingly, you all said, yeah, we think it's a good idea. Because of that overwhelming response, we put it out to an actual vote to group leaders last weekend. That was also an overwhelming response. So this temperature taking was roughly where the Indivisible group leaders were. We issued a national endorsement. Ben was excited and posted it out. And then Nancy Pelosi followed our lead and just yesterday endorsement as well. So we're all building momentum for Ben.
Did she technically cite Indivisible as why? No, but we all know she was thinking about
Indeed.
So. All right, great. Ezra, over to you.
Oh, yeah. So normally we would do a little bit of intro, and we want to do that now to cover the events of the past 48, 72 hours. But there were two questions that came in. So I'll get to all the Q&As, but I'm reminded we are in this moment where a lot of new folks are coming into Indivisible, into the broader political advocacy space, trying to figure out how they can plug in. And damn it, we need you. We want you here. We want to welcome you here. And there were two questions that came in that I want to focus on real quick. One from Molly from California, who said, I would love to know about the history and mission of Indivisible. Where does it stand today in light of the current administration? Which we were like, oh, wow, well, yeah, we have a lot to say about the current administration. And then Mike from Wisconsin said, I want to be part of, this is in all caps, the fight back, not just door knocking, et cetera, but massive demonstrations, et cetera. All caps again, am I in the right place? And it was just a reminder to us, for those of us who have been doing this for years and years, it can be like, we're indivisible. Obviously, we're doing this stuff, but we need to be welcoming to folks who are coming in. So if this is your first time here, welcome. We want you here. We want it to be a place where you can learn, and not just learn, but learn and take action, and where you do feel welcome and that you're a part of this force. Leah and I, so I'll do a little bit of intro. I know this is going to be old hat for folks who have been with us for a long time, but just a little bit of intro before we get to what we're all doing together. At a high level, what is Indivisible? We are a movement organization of thousands of locally led groups. Lee and I are talking to you here. We are married. If you didn't know, we've been doing this for about 8 years. We have now 2 kids, which we didn't have at the start of Trump's election, and I have much less hair. But we are still co-leading Indivisible together and working to do what we can where we can. We are not the leaders of this movement. I really want to emphasize that. There are about 1,100 locally led indivisible groups all around the country. They call the shots. They call the shots on what is the strategic direction, what tactics you're engaging in. What we try to do with Indivisible at national level is provide resources, guidance, intel, but we're all building this together. At a high level, I used to say this at the beginning of these Q&As a lot, so I will just tell you again if you were brand new. We are here to fight back against this clown show of an administration and Congress. We are working to limit harm. We're working to stop what we can. We're working to stall what we can't stop. And we're working to win back some amount of power in 2025 and 2026. We are fundamentally pro-democracy Americans doing what we can wherever we are to build the power that we can, and using that power where we have leverage to change things in the world. That's what we're doing. And for me and Leah, just very quickly, my background, I was a congressional staffer. I worked on campaigns. I worked in anti-poverty policy. That's what I was doing when Donald Trump won. Leah?
I worked in Congress on the Hill early in my career, but I primarily worked in human trafficking policy and advocacy.
That's right. And so we wrote the original Indivisible guide, which recommended that people organize locally and start local indivisible groups in response to Donald Trump's election and the initial, lackadaisical response from Democratic leadership. We wanted folks to organize and say no. And we thought that that kind of grassroots pressure that, frankly, we saw from the Tea Party, which we disagreed with greatly, was lacking at that time, but could form and could affect what happens politically at the national level. Now, I will say, Mike from Wisconsin, who asked, is this the place for massive? I would say yes, but. And the reason why I would say yes, but is we do not start with tactics. That is not where we start. We end with tactics. We start with the goal. We start with the goal. We develop strategies that we all think will help us achieve that goal. And then we devise tactics that we think will carry out those strategies. So some of those things come from Indivisible National. Much of it is dreamt up by you, by local leaders on the ground. So an example, we'll get into this. We want to stop Russell Vogt to lead the OMB. This is an architected project 2025. Again, we'll get into it. The strategy to achieve that goal, we're going to unify dim opposition, and we're going to weaken GOP support with local constituent pressure. That's the strategy. The tactics, letters to the editor, calls and emails to Congress, local congressional visits, and yes, maybe public actions. Maybe public actions, Mike. That could be a piece of it. But it is important. We're not marching for the sake of marching. We're not calling Congress for the sake of calling Congress. We're not making signs for the sake of making signs. We do tactics to achieve a goal. So that is where our minds always are. What is what we're doing going to actually do in the real world? What impact is it going to have in the real world? So with that said, with that impact orientation said, I'm going to, right before we get to Q&A, I'm just going to cover the chaos of the last 48 to 72 hours, specifically the chaos around the OMB freeze. So I'm going to go through I'm going to try to just give you the facts as I saw them and as we experienced them, blow by blow. Monday night, OMB issues this order saying we're going to freeze all federal grants starting at 5 p.m. on Tuesday. So in less than 24 hours, all federal grants, billions, possibly more dollars are going to be frozen. And I don't want to overstate how big this is. And also, it's very hard to overstate how big this is because it is just a shockingly brazen power grab. I posted to Blue Sky and would recommend y'all get on Blue Sky. It's a good place to share information. I posted, not to be an alarmist, but this is the most radical presidential action I've ever seen. He's straight up seizing Congress's budget power. What do laws matter if the Mad King's whims dictate what gets enforced and where money goes? It's not a policy memo. The OMB memo is not a policy memo. It's a revolution. Don't let it be a quiet one. That quote is what the New York Times put in their paper yesterday. I mean it. This is wild. This is wild. So suddenly, after this memo came out Monday night, Medicaid portals in all 5 states just shut down. Daycares notified their parents that maybe they would have to shut down because Head Start funds weren't going to be available. Universities were notifying students that their financial aid might dry up. Folks who were relying on rental assistance were left wondering on February 1st, would they get that rental assistance? It wasn't just bad policy. It wasn't just cruel. It wasn't chaotic. It was a power grab. It was an attempt to undermine the constitutional order of checks and balances and separation of powers. Wild, wild stuff. And the other part of this was that the initial Democratic response was kind of muted. There was this move on Tuesday after the order came out to respond to this by unifying the Senate Democratic caucus to vote against Trump's transportation secretary. This is a guy named Sean Duffy. Nobody knows who he is really in the real world. Nobody was really paying attention to him. The point isn't Sean Duffy. The point isn't the transportation secretary pick. The point is Democrats were thinking about, hey, let's show that we oppose this and we're taking it seriously and we're a new political order, so we're going to vote against it. And this move was not like a lefty move. It wasn't like progressives versus moderates. There were more moderates like Cortez Masto in Nevada who were pushing for this, along with our friends in the progressive space like Warren. But Schumer opposed it. Schumer opposed this as well as a few others. And that immediate response fizzled. The caucus fractured. About half of the Democrats ended up voting for Duffy, half voted against it. Later that day, we heard from Minority Leader Jeffries in the House, who told reporters, oh, yeah, this is bad. We're going to be bringing House Democrats together on Wednesday. That's a whole day later to discuss communication strategy. So just a shockingly flat-footed response from Democrats. The Democrats in the Senate later that day held a conference, a press conference. The press conference was pretty good. The language they used was pretty good and strong, but it was language. It was words. It was no commitment to actually use the power they have to really do anything about it. So Indivisible, we went on offense. I mean, we just went hard on offense. By that morning, we had a 16-page internal strategy document that was written up of like, here's how we're going to launch this campaign. We got 4 call scripts together for Democrats and Republicans and for House members and senators. We had a public brief that went up. And the goal of all this is to unify the Democrats against and to weaken GOP resolve. Indivisible groups all across the country, they started raising the alarm. I know you were doing that. You were activating your own networks to contact your reps. We were able to track what we were driving in this moment. And as far as I know, we drove more than literally any other national organization in the country. In less than 24 hours, we had 15,000 calls to Congress. And again, just the ones we were tracking in less than 24 hours. If you were watching Maddow Tuesday night, you would have seen a lengthy segment specifically on Indivisible's call to action and what we were asking members of Congress to do, because she covered what you all were doing. And actually, I'm curious, we've got about 2,000 folks on this call. Can we throw up a survey? We were talking about this before. I'm curious if you all are among the folks who have called the Senate this week. Can we throw up that survey? Is that easy, folks, on the back of Jules? We might be able to get it up. I want to get a gauge of how active. Oh, this is perfect. So simple survey, just curious. Have you contacted your senators this week? I'm specifically asking about the Russell vote and the OMB freeze, but it would be good to get a sense of how active you all are. And the options are yes, no, or no, but you're going to do it today because this is still live. This is a live fight. I will report back in a sec once we have survey responses. I am getting a lot in the comment section of hell yes, 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 yes. call every day, which I love to hear. I want to be clear. We've been talking about calling members of Congress to put pressure for the better part of a decade now. And the reason why we do it is because it works. It sounds simple, but I can tell you we're both former congressional staffers. It really does work. What we saw once the pressure started to build is members of Congress started speaking up in harsher terms about the impact in their own communities and just how unconstitutional this power grab was. There were Max Frost from Florida, the youngest member of the House. He provided just this live commentary on the disruptions and the fear that he was hearing from his own constituents. Really powerful stuff. And then the lawsuit started flying, absolutely flying. A federal judge issued an injunction, stayed the order for several days. And then here's what happened. Here's what happens. For those of you who say it's pointless, we should be cynical, that they're going to do what they're going to do. There's nothing we can do to fight back. We have no power. Here's what happened. In response to pressure and alarm and the legal challenges, the Trump team started to backtrack and regroup. And it was so chaotic because they're not brilliant masterminds. They don't really know what they're doing. They're just bulls in a china shop. But they announced that they rescinded the memo, right? And then an hour later, they said, oh, whoa. Yeah, we rescinded the memo, but the underlying policy of freezing all federal funds, that's still in effect. And then a federal judge announced another injunction saying, hey, well, wait a minute. If you are just rescinding the memo and not the policy, that's no different. So you still have to stop doing that. So this leaves us in a really weird place right now. It is chaotic. We are in this place where some federal stuff is frozen, some other things are moving forward, and they very clearly would like to move forward as fast as possible with another attempt at freezing these funds. Things like Holocaust Remembrance Day is over, is canceled in the federal agencies. Black History Month has been canceled. That yes, the Medicaid portals are open, but it's clear that the administration intends to move forward. So I know y'all want specific action items and you want to know what you can do. Let me give you an update on where Dems are and where Republicans are and what we can do about this, and then we'll get to Q&A. So where are Dems? They have started to wake up. I wouldn't say they're in full fighting form yet, but I would say they've started to wake up. Schumer announced ahead of time that they're opposing Russell Vought to lead OMB. Now, this is one of the architects of Project 2025. Senate Democrats, I thought this was a good move. Senate Democrats boycotted Vought's hearing in the Budget Committee today. That's good. They're showing that they're not putting up with this, that this isn't politics as usual. But here's what Democrats are not doing yet. They're not using the tools of the Senate minority to slow things down. And we really want them to do that. There are specific things they can do. They can reject unanimous consent agreements, which allow the Senate to continue to function relatively quickly. They can vote no on cloture, which is effectively requiring a 60-vote threshold to move forward on anything. They can vote no on procedural votes. They can request quorum calls that basically say, hey, is everybody in the room that needs to be in the room? Let's count. And this isn't a way to defeat a nominee. This isn't a way to defeat legislation. It's a way to slow things down, allow public pressure to build, which then will allow us to prevent some of the worst that's happening. If you're interested in that and you've got a Dem senator, we've got a whole call script. We've got a whole brief that will walk you through what precisely it is that you're asking about. But this is not just about Democrats. Republicans are vulnerable on this. Nobody, aside from the right-wing fringe, wants to see Meals on Wheels eliminated. Nobody aside from the right-wing fringe wants to see Head Start eliminated. Project 2025 had a 4% rating when it was tested a few months ago. I mean, it is not a popular agenda. So when it comes to Russell Vought, this guy that Trump is trying to install as head of the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, they're vulnerable on this guy. Susan Collins is vulnerable on this guy. Lisa Murkowski is vulnerable on this guy. John Cornyn is vulnerable on this guy. Joni Ernst is vulnerable on this guy. Everybody I just mentioned, they're up for re-election next year. They should be getting pressure from their constituents. They should be getting calls. They should be letters to the editor. They should be being asked, why do you support a guy that's trying to end Meals on Wheels in Iowa, in Texas, in Alaska? Bonkers position, and they should have to answer for it. Now, just a global comment before we get to Q&A, and Leah, then I'll throw most of the questions to Leah. High level, what does this tell us? we have, over the last 72 hours, seen a rapid response campaign to vast overreach from this administration. And we're going to see it again and again and again. And what it tells us is, by all means, winning an election is enough to make Donald Trump president. It is not enough to make him king. They want to govern as if checks and balances don't exist, as if public approval does not matter at all. They're wrong, and they don't even act as if public approval doesn't matter at all. They respond. Public pressure worked. So if you called in or contacted your reps to help make this happen, bravo. It worked. It had immediate impact. It's not to say we've won and it's game over and even this specific threat is past. None of that's true. We lived to fight another day. That's what we succeeded. And that's true this Thursday. It's going to be true next Thursday. It's going to be true the Thursday after that. So congratulations. We won this skirmish. There will be future skirmishes. Okay. So with that all said, we're ready to get to Q&A. We got a ton of questions and I want to get to it. Leah, are you ready? Because I've been talking a lot. Okay. So we're going to start with questions that came in ahead of time on resisting Project 2025. Okay. Jerry from New Jersey asks, and for context, I literally just read these questions, y'all. So we're trying to be an open book. Jerry from New Jersey asks, how should communities respond when we see ICE police roaming the streets? What resources does Indivisible provide?
It's a great question. All right. So short answer. There are a ton of different organizations and entities out there that are offering different versions of Know Your Rights trainings right now. I think if you are not, if you are not personally impacted by ICE, you might not understand that these are actually really helpful and important for everyone to know and understand, right? Because if you are in, a store that ICE enters, if you are on a attempts to stop, you understanding what rights everyone on the bus has and how you should be interacting with ICE can have a huge impact. So what I would say is we will send out, I see that somebody's already popping the United We Dream link in the chat.
Great,
United We Dream is a great resource on this for folks. Again, whether you are impacted or whether you want to be an ally to people who are impacted, understanding how you should interact with ICE, strongly recommend signing up for a Know Your Rights training. I know a bunch of Indivisible groups have been partnering with other organizations to do Know Your Rights trainings locally. That is a great activity to do to make sure as much of your community is aware as possible. I don't know if everyone saw this, but this weekend or over a couple of days ago, Thomas Homans, who is the incredibly awful and horrific immigration czar for the Trump administration, he gave an interview complaining about how they have been less successful than they would like to have been in their initial attempts to do mass deportations in Chicago because everybody knows their rights and they're super well organized. So if you're from Chicago and you have been part of that, take a bow in the chat and keep it up because fundamentally this stuff locally works really well.
I'm going to remind myself and Leah, one of the most common comments we get is to slow down.
Oh, darn it.
We are fast speakers. And that's just, I have coffee in hand and I do this too, but I'm going to try to keep this in mind. Mm-hmm. We're going to have impact. We're going to have fast impact and we're going to talk about it 20% slower than we normally do.
Great point. Great point.
A question came in the chat that's relevant to all of this as well. Karen Bauer, hope I'm pronouncing your name right, asks, is emailing as effective as calling representatives? Leah, do you want to answer from your own perspective as a congressional staffer, emailing versus calling?
Yeah, so I'm going to say calling is the gold standard. And calling is the gold standard for a few reasons. You can be, and I'm going to talk slowly while I do it. Calling is the gold standard because you can ask for a response and you can kind of interact. And the way that the system works, they record what you are doing while you are on the call, right? So I am on the other line of I am answering your call and I am literally in the computer system looking up your address right there and putting you in the no on vote, yes on vote column for the member of Congress or for the senator. That is the simplest and clearest feedback mechanism. And I can then say, and when will I get a reply, right? And make clear that I expect a follow-up piece of correspondence on this thing. An email is a one-way interaction. So, and you don't know when and how long it's going to take to be logged. So I would say calling is more effective, but if you only have time to email, then email. The most important thing is reaching out.
Can there's this specific experience of being a congressional staffer in a congressional office when members of your constituency are very pissed off. Oh, yeah. And you feel it and you hear it because what happens is all of the lines into that congressional office are ringing. And what you see on your phone is that every one of the lines is full. And as soon as somebody hangs up one line, it's full again. There is a sense that you as a member of Congress and you as a staffer has when you're in one of those moments, when tons of your constituents are calling. You can kind of get that sense with emails. Your opinion is logged, but it actually does have a different emotional impact. You're not immediately feeling and seeing and hearing, oh my gosh, our constituents are angry about something. So, like Leah said, I would push more towards calls, and better yet, would be even towards going to a congressional office with a group of folks to demonstrate how jazzed up you are. Okay, let's keep on going because we got a lot of questions. Sue from Minnesota asked, will Trump somehow be able to bypass state ratification to negate the amendments he wishes off the books?
Oof. It's an interesting question. I think the short version that I would say, I have kind of an answer from our strategic perspective, and I have just my attempt to be as real talk as possible. This administration has made super clear that it will break the law in a ton of different ways, and will continue doing so until somebody forces them to stop, either via public pressure or via legal means, right? This is the way that he has shown up so far. He has issued a number of different executive orders that are flagrantly unconstitutional, right? Birthright citizenship being the most obvious example, but obviously this week is also a great demonstration. They're going to try to get away with a ton of different things. The two tools that the tool that we have is the public pushback, right? Because fundamentally what they are doing right now is they are pushing the boundaries for what they can get away with. So I think that the question is not, is he going to try to go around the state ratification process? The question is, how are we organizing collectively so that whenever there is an attack that is obviously unconstitutional, we are prepared to mobilize in a way that wakes up our own elected officials to push back.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. We got another question. I'll go to some live questions after this next one that came in ahead of time. I think this is a question I've seen come up on social media a lot too. Nancy from California asks, how do we push back against the bill introduced to give Trump another term?
It's a great question. So here's what I would say. That bill is currently a message bill. It is not on track to move. If it picks up speed, we will obviously let everybody know and we will actively work against it. But right now, it is not something that we are monitoring or that we are tracking as an immediate and urgent threat. It is, I would describe it as propaganda that's more designed to further reinforce the sense of inevitability and power of the Trump administration versus an actual organized effort to give him the ability to have a third term.
We were talking to Mary Small, our chief strategy officer, actually about this specific question. It came up, and she said, well, look, the way that we're thinking about issues right now fall into kind of two categories. One, is this an issue that is causing a lot of harm and we can reduce the harm by generating a lot of pressure on it? Or two, is this an issue where we can grow our coalition by campaigning on it? Those are the two broad ways that we would say, yeah, we should be doing a lot of action on this. This bill to possibly allow Trump a third term, it's neither of those. It is, like Leah said, it's mainly propaganda right now, and it's not going anywhere. Speed, we would absolutely focus on it. But right now, it's propaganda that isn't directly causing harm to human beings because it's just a messaging bill. And by focusing on it, we're not focusing on an issue that will grow our coalition and help fracture theirs. So it's not that it's not serious. It's not that we wouldn't care about it. It's that we are trying to focus our energy where we can have impact, either in limiting harm or building our coalition to win. Okay, some live questions that came in. We'll try to hit a few of these, and there are tons. So I'm just going to go through. We'll try to do quick answers to these. Donald said Cory Booker's voicemail is constantly full. Look, I think Cory's a great guy in many ways. It's unacceptable though that he is not taking in input from his constituents. I would say that about my favorite members of Congress or my least favorite members of Congress. He needs to be able to take an input, and if you're not able to reach him through calling, you need to put pressure on him in other public ways. You can make the point that he is not being accessible to you, you can write a letter to the editor. You can show up at a local congressional office of Booker's or any senators. They have congressional offices spread all across the state. You can just show up. You really can. It is a public office. You can walk in and say, hey, I was trying to call, wasn't able to get through voicemail, was full. So I just showed up with 10 of my friends and we would like your comments on X. Again, nothing against Booker on this in particular, but it is a reasonable expectation as a constituent that you are able to share your opinions with your representatives in Congress. So if they are not taking that input and there's no other way to reach them, your only recourse is more public pressure or showing up in person at their congressional offices.
I have one step you can take in between that, though, which is if you are calling the federal office, the federal Senate office, every senator and every congressperson also has district offices, which will have a different phone line. They are hooked into the same constituent feedback system, so they can also log your calls. So if you are not getting through at the main office, look up the district offices and see if you can get through that way.
Yeah, going to go through a couple more that came in live. Claire said Heather Cox Richardson, who's great, says we should contact Republicans who are not 100% MAGA. We need them to break from Trump. Do you agree? Absolutely. Absolutely. And actually, I would even put, 100% MAGA is probably right. For the hardcore MAGAs, they're not going to care that you call. But when I was talking earlier, I mentioned John Cornyn and Joni Ernst. I mentioned them not because I think they're the most vulnerable Republican senators in the country, but they don't have an easy ride in their next election. And if there's sufficient blowback, they could have to be worried. And here's the thing about calling Republican representatives and senators. A lot of times they're not going to tell you exactly what you want to hear. They might not even shift their position publicly, but if the pressure is sufficient, what they will do is in their internal caucus meetings, when all the Republicans meet with everybody else, they're going to say, I'm getting a whole lot of help from my constituents back home about this. You got to lay off. Like people are yelling at me about Head Start and Meals on Wheels.
Exactly.
Quiet that, focus on the other stuff. So do not get discouraged if you've got something like John Cornyn who sucks being your senator. He still might be gauging what is happening, especially if there's overwhelming pressure.
Yeah, I would just emphasize part of what happened this week was that we bucked up Democrats, but also part of what happened was that a bunch of Republicans got an earful from a bunch of their own people, and quietly they communicated to the White House that they were freaking out too.
Yep. One more question from the chat, and then we'll go back to questions that came in earlier. And it's related. Stephen asked, Republicans are being hurt too. How can we get them to join the fight? I think this hits on such a core part of what we think needs to happen between now and November 2026.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, fundamentally, we've got to figure out a bunch of ways to grow our coalition. And that means both reaching out to people who did not turn out to vote, who might be Democratic voters in 2024. And it also means reaching out to people who might have voted for Trump because they were upset with the status quo, because they were frustrated with how things were going economically. I want to be really clear when I talk about this. There's a hardcore MAGA base that's rooted in a deep culture of grievance. Those folks, not reachable on any kind of immediate time frame. When I talk about trying to do outreach and grow that coalition, I'm not talking about trying to go to the person who is the farthest down the right-wing rabbit hole. I am talking about people who are who are frustrated about inflation, who had kind of a general sense that things weren't going well, who voted because they were frustrated with the status quo. We can talk to those people. We can say, hey, sure, it seems like things are getting worse, right? Is your life better right now? Because right now it seems like there is chaos everywhere and he is actively not caring. Trump does not care about you. He cares about his billionaire buddies and backers. And meanwhile, he is trying to cut the funding for programs that you depend on, that your job depends on, that your community depends on, in order to give more money to his cronies. All that outreach is going to be really crucial in how we build the coalition that wins in 2026 and the coalition that wins in 2028. Now, how we do that is going to depend on the issue, right? We are going to think about places where policy directly impacts people's lives. I think this last week has demonstrated that we are going to have a long-term series of fights as this administration tries to cut funds for programs that are broadly popular and that a bipartisan coalition of people depend on. We are going to have to figure out ways to get the understanding that those programs are being targeted, that they are on the chopping block, out to people who can be activated. And so we have to think about creative strategies for neighborhood outreach, for community outreach, for social media outreach, to get people's eyeballs on that before the harm is done so that they can activate.
Okay, a couple questions that came in ahead of time, and we're going to move on to the next section of questions in a bit. But Angela from Idaho asked, this was the subject actually of the call last week. Do the safe spaces or sensitive locations that have been revoked for ICE entry include healthcare facilities? The answer is yes, Angela. And for those who were not following last week, a new memo went out last week that told ICE that while for the last dozen to 15 years, they have been barred from raiding elementary schools and hospitals and churches, that guidance has been revoked. And even Trump first term didn't do that, but that has now been revoked. So yes, healthcare facilities, air game for ICE now. If somebody is going to the emergency room, ICE is now cleared to go pick them up, which is uh, incredibly
Vile.
cruel. It's vile. It's heinous, and they are trying to terrorize these communities and prevent people from dropping their kids off at elementary school or seeking medical care when they need it, or even freaking going to church. We have some guidance for how to push back on that. We'll follow up as we do every time with some resources, and one of those is how to push back specifically on this memo. There are things you can do in your own community on that. Let's move on to strategies and tactics for taking action. This overlaps with some questions that came in live too. So hopefully we get a couple taken care of, which is this question. Danielle from Pennsylvania asked, how many times a week should I be calling my reps? Do I need to call them about the same issues more than once? And actually, I'm just going to extend it. I saw a question in the chat that went by, which was, can I raise multiple issues in one call? We got a similar question last time, but I think it's worth hammering on this point. Leah?
Yeah. So the way that the call recording system works is you call me, you say, I'm upset about 5 different things. I am an overworked congressional staffer, and probably what I'm going to do is I'm going to record one of those things, maybe the easiest one to code in the system,
Yeah.
and then I'm going to hang up the phone. So if you want to have your vote, your input recorded on each of those issues, I would recommend that you call separately for each of those issues so that you go in the tally for each of those calls, or each of those calls is definitely recorded in the tally that members keep on an issue. And actually, just to back up on that point, the way that all this works is like, I call the office, I say, vote no on vote. That goes
Russell
in
vote.
Russell vote. Right?
Vote no on vote. Yeah.
Yeah. There no shortage of puns there. That's going to go in the internal system as it's going to get coded as vote no. And there are other people who are calling who are saying vote yes, and it's just going to get tallied up. And at the end of the day, that tally sheet is going to go to the elected officials' chief of staff or to their legislative director, whoever is the right person, and they're going to have an understanding of how many people called in supporting Russell vote and how many people called in opposing him. And so our goal collectively is to get that tally to be overwhelmingly opposition in both Democratic and Republican offices. We want people to understand that this is a pick that we are watching closely and that there will be consequences for.
I'm going to make 3 very specific tactical recommendations for when you're calling. We say this a lot, but keep in mind, as Leah said, you were often talking to an intern, maybe an unpaid intern or a very junior staffer. I was a 23-year-old working in a congressional office once. That's who's often answering the phone. Some of them are great and some of them are incompetent, but all of them don't want to look bad in front of their bosses. And so I would recommend this. 1, if you're not giving your name and address and they don't ask for it, they're not recording your input. They will say, oh yeah, we've taken your concern. We'll pass it on to my boss. They're not doing it. Give them your name and address. 2, request a response. Say, I would like a written response to this. And that allows you to follow up if you do not get that written response. They should give you a written response within a week. 3rd, ask for the name of the staffer who you're talking to. That is reasonable. You can say, and who am I talking to? Now, throughout all this, be polite. Do not yell. Do not be rude. Do not curse. You shouldn't do that just at a human level, but it's also not effective. Be polite, but insistent. It is reasonable. They need to record it. So they need to know your constituent, your name and address. 2, they need to respond to you. And 3, you need to know who you're talking to. So if you don't get a response, you could say, hey, I was talking to Bob last week. They recorded this. And you're not always going to get the same person. If enough people say, I was talking to Bob last week and I didn't get a response because Bob isn't recording your input, Bob is going to get a talking to. from the member
Right.
or from their boss. So those three things, whenever you're calling, I would recommend always do that. Okay, more on strategies, tactics, and taking actions. How do we express, this is Sarah from Vermont. How do we express mass outrage for all the things Trump is doing? Should we host a mass demonstration? Would enough people come?
It's a great question. So I actually would really love for input from Indivisible leaders in the chat on this question, because I know that you all are talking to your own groups. One of the things that we look for when we're saying, is it the moment for a national protest, is the kind of organic, energy that people are bubbling up and really looking to get involved. One of the things that I think we have heard from a bunch of groups right now is a desire to really understand how protest is playing into a clear strategy for winning, right? And wanting to make sure that they understand like what is the relationship between the protests that we're doing and a strategy pushing something back and stopping something bad. I think over the last week, we've seen a real uptick in people who are picking up, paying attention, focusing in on, what they can do right now. And we want to be thoughtful about how do we actually take all that and make sure people, one, feel and understand that what they've done over the last couple of days has had an impact, and then feel more confident in taking more and higher level actions like in-person protest where it's appropriate. So I definitely think like we are listening, and we want to be hearing from Indivisible group leaders, who are often the people who are actually pulling together the protests, around the energy that they are getting from their own folks. That's a really important input for us in determining whether there is critical mass for protest, because what we want to do if we're going to do a protest, it has it be very, very significant in a way that really has to get people's attention.
Yeah. Got a couple specific questions in the chat when we were talking about calling before. Rose asked, what about leaving messages? A couple other folks asked about what leaving messages. Lois asked, do they track calls? About what is there danger of calling too much? Susan also asked about leaving messages. So I guess, so calling too much and leaving messages. These are two just specific tactical questions, Leah.
I mean, I think it's fine. I think it's better, it's better to, as Ezra notes, get a person and have them take your message down. It is completely possible.
We had an intern who had to listen to all the messages when I was in the office. It was a bummer of a job, but we did have somebody listen to all the messages and then record it. Again, you can't ask for the intern's name when they're doing it. So who knows if you'll be recorded or not? It depends on the quality of the staffer.
Yep, that's right.
The answer is you can't call too much to the office in general. If you call on the exact same issue and the exact same vote over and over again, it doesn't do any good. But let's say a bill gets introduced in the Senate, and the question is, are they going to vote against cloture, so against the 60 vote threshold? That's one vote. Now, if there's another vote, like, are you going to vote for the bill itself? That is another vote. And so while you shouldn't call and contact them on like in the same week on the exact same issue on the same vote, that's just going to be recorded once. As a piece of legislation moves through the process, it does make sense to call again. And you can indeed call every day. What I would recommend with your Indivisible group is everybody set a time where you say, we're all going to call at this hour. So they get the sense that, wow, we just got 10 calls in 1 hour on this one issue. That can, again, what you're trying to do is give them a sense that people care. That's really the goal here. Part of that is numbers. Part of that is just a sense of how much this is blowing up in this moment. And you can do that individually, you add to it, but coordinated, 20 calls to an office can by itself make a big impact. Okay. We'll keep on bouncing back between questions that were in the chat and questions that were live. Just real quick, there was a question and again, we're doing this live, so I'm going through the questions that came in. Christine, I'm sorry, said, I'm in San Francisco. My senator and rep are on board. Do I need to call? Christine, yes, you do need to call. Please call. And look, you might have the best senators and representative in the world. And if you do, and if they are doing literally everything possible, thank them. Thank them. We talk about this all the time. I remember vividly as a junior legislative staffer and during times when folks were calling, getting a thank you call from some constituent, and the chief of staff being so thrilled that he went directly into the member's office and said, Lloyd, I work for Lloyd, look at this message that came in. This is This is an effective tactic if you've got good reps, and I think Lloyd Doggett is incredible. And so I wish he was thanked more often. Leah worked for a great member of Congress as well, but thank you, sir.
Nobody ever thanked us.
Nobody ever thanked Leah's boss. This is an effective tactic. I will say, so thank yous are effective. I would also say, just because you got two senators who are Democrats in California does not mean they're doing everything possible. So I would get specific on what you're asking to do for your senators in California. Ask, are they withholding consent? Are they calling quorum calls? Are they using the tools of the minority in the Senate to slow things down? The answer right now, Christine, is they're not, even though they're good California Democratic senators.
I wanna pull back the lens there. There is an active argument in the Democratic Party and in the Democratic Senate caucus right now about strategy in relation to the Trump administration. And there is a very strong and currently dominant idea that you're gonna tune out most of the noise, that you're mostly not gonna react to the things that Donald Trump is gonna do, and that you're gonna respond to everything he does by going, but how will that lower prices? And this is, in our opinion, a terrible strategy. It is a strategy that both leaves a bunch of people who are depending on Democrats to defend them, to defend the Constitution, to defend what does work about our system of government. It leaves them high and dry. And it is also not a good political strategy because we exist in an era where that is simply not going to break through to the people who we need to hear from us. They are not actually going to get the message from Democrats if the message that Democrats are putting out into the ether is super boring. That's just not how it works in an era when algorithms are what decides, who hears from you or what messages travel. So what we are trying to do when we push Democrats, yes, we're trying to get their vote on an individual issue. Yes, we are trying to take down specific nominees right now. But more importantly, what we are trying to do is shift the inputs that they are hearing so that they understand that there is a big and active and engaged and potentially really annoyed constituency demanding that they be more aggressive in taking on and checking Trump.
Yep. I think you just answered this question, Leah, but just check and see if you want to add more. Jasmine from Pennsylvania asks, how can we push Democrats to be less accommodating and strategize ways to subvert this MAGA-led Congress? I think you basically just answered that.
Yeah, I would say, I think this is, if you're an individual, you're contacting them regularly. If you're part of a group, you should be exploring what are you doing to get in person with that member of Congress and their staff as fast as possible, because these people need to hear from regular people who are in their district, who are in their state. They need to hear directly that anger is building at what Donald Trump is doing and that we need to see them dedicated and passionate and out front defending us and our rights and our way of life. So I would say fundamentally, the thing that helps to move them is shows of their own people, their own constituents who are mad and who are looking for action.
Yeah, I love as an ask, putting specific policy or nominees aside, I love as an ask, hey, hold a town hall. It's easy. It's part of their job. They ought to be coming back home to the state or district to hold a town hall. If you've got a Republican that refuses to hold a town hall, then they're cowards, and you can criticize them for being cowards. And if you get a Democrat that does hold a town hall, you can create contrast. Look, the Dems are showing up in their district, answering to constituents. The Republicans are not. And if the Democrats aren't holding town halls, they're missing an opportunity. They should be feeding off the energy in their constituency and using that energy to fight back. So
I want to add one more thing. I do think folks don't necessarily totally understand exactly how direct a relationship there is between the inputs that we get or that members of Congress and senators get and the way that they act. Like when we talk to people and we say, why are you doing this strategy? Why are you being so low key in the face of such an enormous onslaught of threats and dangers? They literally, the first thing they say is, I'm not really getting that many calls about it.
Yeah.
That is the first thing they say. This is a really crucial line by which they interpret and make meaning about what is happening in their district. And so I know sometimes it's like, really, I got to call them again. Why did they not get the message the first 10 times? And also we do it because it works.
Yep. Just actually for context, I mentioned that effort right after the OMB memo came out to unify the Dems in the Senate to vote against the nominee of the transportation secretary, right? One of the things that drove us to launch as much of a full-fledged campaign is we got contact from folks in Democratic Senate offices saying Democratic leadership doesn't have its stuff together, doesn't have its act together. They need pressure. So we are being asked by our allies on Capitol Hill who work in Democratic offices who want to see Democrats unify against this stuff. We are getting requests to, can you turn up the pressure on us, on our Democratic colleagues, because we need that to drive us towards unification. And then actually they got in touch afterwards and said, it's working. People are waking up. So you should note, it's not just me and Leah out here saying, hey, this would be a good idea. We're in it.
Yeah.
We're talking to folks who are in these offices on Capitol Hill. And what we call this is inside outside strategy. So on the inside, you got allies who are fighting for one approach. On the outside, we can generate pressure. And by working together, this is how we unify Dems together and actually notch some wins. That's the play. Okay, some more questions. Go. We've got a lot. So let's try to get through some more. Where can we put our, this is a test from Arizona. Actually, we have Tina from Arizona right next to each other. So I'll ask both of these. Tina asks, asking for good strategies to put pressure on Juan Ciscomani et al., MAGA, and reveal his either cowardice or agreement with, what's FOTUS?
I'm not sure.
Oh, it's probably
Probably
POTUS president.
I think
Yeah.
it's POTUS.
And then Tess from Arizona asks, where can we put our efforts to flip the House or the Senate in 2026? What states need our help and which candidates are running? Well, Tess, Arizona, you've got at least a couple districts, but.
Well, look, Juan Ciscomani, for folks who don't know who that is, Juan Ciscomani is.
POTUS is felon of the United States. I've not heard that. That's great.
Everybody. Juan Ciscomani is a member of Congress from Arizona. He represents a swing district. He got narrowly elected in 2022 and again in 2024. He is vulnerable. He is the exact kind of person who is vulnerable in 2026. And so what I would say is, one, we should be trying to push him to vote the right way, to try and, stall stuff within the caucus, et cetera. So we should be doing our direct advocacy to him. But two, every time he backs the administration, we should be making sure that his constituents know about it, because fundamentally, we've got polling on a bunch of the stuff that's already happened over the last couple of weeks. A lot of this stuff is not popular, and we know the backlash is going to build because they are trying to do things that directly harm regular people around the country. They are trying to do things that are shockingly, visibly cruel and weird. They are trying to do a bunch of things that are actually going to ultimately trigger backlash if people know about it and if people associate their elected officials with this effort. So fundamentally, I would think about what are the creative tools that you can come up with locally to try and get Juan Ciscomani on the record about things, about the things the Trump administration is doing, to try to make sure people are aware of when he will not break from Trump and the administration in places that have direct impacts for the district. So think about what is important within your district and what is Juan Ciscomani doing. What is he doing to help, or what is he not doing to help? And fundamentally think about what are your distribution channels, right? Are you on TikTok? Are you on social media? Are you pushing out press releases that are getting picked up by local papers? What are the ways in which you not only directly pressure him, but also get eyeballs on the story of who he is and what he is doing?
Question about Indivisible specifically, and y'all heard at the outset, but this is from Liza from Massachusetts. Why is Indivisible not openly supporting Ben Wickler? At least to my knowledge, we need a strong, capable, impressive leader. We agree. We have endorsed Ben Wickler. I will say, just at a more meta level, one of the challenges of having a nationwide distributed grassroots movement like Indivisible is just literally communicating out what we are doing and getting resources and announcements to everybody. We communicate in a lot of different ways. We do these calls, we have emails, we send text messages, but the fundamental problem is that you kind of have to say things 7 different ways, 7 different times to get that message out everywhere. So I would actually turn this into a request to folks. Be ambassadors for what we are all doing together. You don't have to send our emails out to folks. You're welcome to, but you all are communicating to people in your community. And I would highly recommend you not just rely on national infrastructure, even like ours, to get the message out. So we try to do our best every single Monday of sending out action items and announcements of what we're doing. Here's what's driving the week. Here's what you can do about it. That's our, we reach a lot of people through it. We don't reach everybody through it. So if you aren't signed up for that yet, I would highly recommend you get signed up. If you are signed up and getting it, help spread the message. Either feel free to take it. You don't have to even credit us with it, but take the information and spread it out or forward it to other folks. This is a people power movement, and having a people power movement means letting people know that it exists and they can be part of the solution here. I'm going to note we're going to go a little bit long. It's at 4 o'clock. I want to note a couple things. One, we are getting nowhere near answering all the questions that have come in. That is standard for these meetings. I have promised in the past, and I will promise again, that we are working on figuring out a system for kind of elevating the questions that have the most heat behind them and where their most interest is. We have not yet figured out that system. As of last time, we've moved to this Q&A system, which helps us collect a little bit faster. It doesn't help us answer faster. The other thing I would say is we have questions that are coming in a survey that we'll send after this tomorrow. We've just gone through this one big rapid response moment with you all. It was a good test case scenario of how are they going to overreach and how can we respond effectively. We've got some questions about how we can work with you all to respond rapidly in response to put pressure and have impact. And we want to know what you want to do and what you would respond to and what your local group or what you individually would do. So I would highly, highly encourage you to fill out the survey, please, that comes afterwards. It's only going to take a minute. And we legitimately use those responses to try to figure out how we move forward. We do not have all the answers to this. There are Beth Call, who are brilliant in organizing your own communities and have strategic and tactical thoughts. We want to tap into that to figure out how we can move together as a movement and have impact. So with that said, we'll go longer than the 4 o'clock time. If you got to drop, you got to drop. There will be a transcript. There will be a recording. All of that will go out tomorrow for the full call. But just wanted to say that before 4 o'clock Eastern time, so everybody got it. Okay, with that, Leah, any comments on that before we go forward? Okay.
No, it's great.
Oh, the good question from Emmerich in Colorado asks, are there organizations that you would recommend supporting, such as Public Citizen, Blue Amp Action, and others? We work with other organizations all the time. Indivisible is not the end-all be-all of fighting back against this ridiculous regime. Leah, some of your favorites?
Yeah, so we often work super closely with Move On and Working Families
Absolutely.
Party. I know that there's some folks who work across or with both of those organizations. We try to stay synced up so that we can really, like we're pushing collectively and making sure that you're not getting like super different messages and analyses from each other. Let's see, what are some of your favorites?
Well, so just to give a sense of what is Indivisible superpower, we have Indivisible is a national movement organization. So in addition to Leah and myself, we've got state lead organizers spread around the country who help groups on the ground. We've got a relatively small policy team that has some expertise, but does a lot of work with issue area experts. So if we're working on abortion issues, we'll work with Planned Parenthood, or we're working on immigration issues, we'll work with United We Dream. So we have tight partnerships with those issue area experts. We have a political team that works with campaigns, and we have a data team that helps us roll out things like Neighbor to Neighbor, which we're interested in using for advocacy purposes, so we can build across neighborhoods as well. So we have ways to engage with the movement, and we have ways to offer tools to the movement. But a big part of what we do is work with the experts in specific issues, the poll testing folks, the message testing folks that have expertise outside. I do not feel like Indivisible is or should be the only place where you're getting your information. I hope it's a hub that is useful, that people can organize under. But fundamentally, you should be connecting both nationally and locally with groups that can fill in the gaps that we just don't have the capacity to fill in.
That's right.
Okay, a question from Brenna in Michigan. How to organize resistance? Should secrecy be one of the working principles to protect members? What a great question, and really takes me back to 2017, actually.
Yeah, it's a great question. The first thing I would say is I think this depends a lot on where you are organizing and what the organizing conditions are. I know that we have some people within our network who have to make some pretty intentional security and safety decisions based on being in really red areas, in really rural areas where there's, where there are active paramilitary organizations, people who've had security threats. I know that that is a real dynamic for some people, and we've got some security resources that we try to offer for folks who are thinking about how do they assess their own threat levels. So I think that you do have to make a set of decisions based on the conditions that you face, what you know about organized opposition, et cetera. With that said, I think that a really important thing that we collectively do during a period like this is demonstrate that we will not be cowed. That's not the same thing as not being afraid, right? Because part of being courageous is actually like being afraid and doing it anyways. It is the collective demonstration that, yes, there is an administration that is malevolent, that is attempting to go after a lot of different aspects of our way of life and our well-being and our civil liberties. And also, we will be pushing back. We will be showing up in public. We will be doing protests. We will be demanding that our elected officials continue to fulfill their roles and that they be brave, right? And that courage is contagious, right? That is what we have been trying to work through as a movement. How do we collectively show enough people that resistance is not only is possible and is crucial and is ultimately the thing that is going to shift us back into the conditions where we have a real and true democracy. So we got to organize in the ways that make the most sense locally. We've got to take the appropriate security precautions where we are. But fundamentally, we do this stuff to show that we're not afraid.
Mm-hmm. Quick question from somebody in the chat was a lot of advice about calling senators. What about calling our reps? I think the reason why we've been focusing on senators so much right now is just because the immediate action item is opposing a nominee, and the nominees are confirmed by the Senate. The House doesn't have a role. There's absolutely a role for representatives to play too, but that's mainly on the legislation side of things rather than the nominee side of things. That said, your House member can indeed yell about what they are doing to freeze federal funds. I mentioned earlier, Maxwell Frost from Florida did a great job of live community. This is the impact in my community on Head Start, on Meals on Wheels, on my local community centers, et cetera. Your representative has a platform, and they should be educating their constituents about what is happening. And so we have been focusing on the Senate because that's the immediate action item vote now, but by all means, call both, call senators and representatives. We got a question, and I saw this in the chat, and we also got it ahead of time. Robert raised it in the chat about impeachment. And I think it's something worth focusing on because we do hear that. What about impeachment? Should we be pushing for it? Leah, do you want to cover it from a strategic or tactical standpoint?
Sure. I want to reiterate that our analysis is that Trump has done roughly 8,000 things that are unconstitutional in the time that he has already retaken office. And so this is not a reflection on whether this is not an assessment about the merits of the question. This is an assessment about, in a period of absolute overwhelm, how are we developing strategies and where are we directing our attention and focus? And so our focus and the way that we're thinking about where do we push is, can we stop something? Can we reduce harm? Can we actually have a material impact in, keeping people's lives from getting worse? And then also, how do we build the majority coalition that we are ultimately going to need for 2026 and for 2028? And so we're thinking about where are the places that we can make a real impact, and where are the places where we plant a flag and we fight in a way that pulls more people in with us, either activating people who didn't feel like it was worth their time to vote, or pulling some of those marginal voters back into our coalition because they see that we're the ones fighting for them and Trump is the one trying to give tax breaks to his billionaire buddies, right? So that's how we're going to orient. And right now, impeachment would not meet kind of either of those criteria. It's not that he's not doing things that absolutely would rise to that standard in any functioning world at all, or functioning democratic system. It's that we have to make choices about where we're dedicating our resources and our energy and our attention. And we want to focus on what's going to get us to 2026, what's going to get us to 2028, what's going to build the biggest coalition to protect democracy.
Yep. We'll just take a couple more just to try to get through more folks, and really appreciate everybody staying on throughout all of this, and hope it's been useful for folks. Got a question. What will it take to get, this is live, what will it take to get more reps to communicate like AOC and Maxwell Frost do, which I just think they're such brilliant communicators. I would say, I think sometimes we have a tendency to say, well, members of Congress come with a certain point of view and they're just going to be the way they're going to be. And the thing you got to know about members of Congress is they got to be members of Congress because they like making speeches and they like getting applause. Like that is the number one thing that you need to be able to do if you're going to run for Congress. Jasmine Crockett, also good example of somebody who's an incredible, inspiring speaker. Now, some of them are naturally gifted speakers and can rile up a crowd, and some are not as much. But the thing that members of Congress really love is adulation. They like to get cheers. They like to see that the people are with them. And it's not that they're always going to behave in a certain way. They're going to evaluate, well, is there support for this? Is there pressure to go this way? Or is there more support to demonstrate that I'm willing to work with MAGA or willing to work with Republicans? So the best thing that we all can do in this moment, whether you've got an inspiring Democratic member of Congress or more of a disappointing one, is to provide the kind of external stimuli to that member of Congress that will lead them to believe, oh, there is advantage in me talking this way. So praising somebody like AOC or Jasmine Crockett or Maxwell Frost for being out there and saying clearly what needs to be said and providing pushback to the more disappointing members in this moment that you expect more from them, that's the way to lead them in the direction that you want to see. What we saw in 2017 was not Donald Trump won and suddenly the Democratic Party was the party of no, in opposition, in resistance. That's not how it went down. The initial response of the Democratic Party in 2017 was, let's see how we can work with the Republicans. Let's not go overboard opposing everything. It was somewhat like what we've been seeing in the early part of this year. What happened to change their minds is they went back home and held town halls and heard from thousands of constituents that they expected that representative or that senator to fight back. You should be one of those constituents. Your blandest, most disappointing Democratic member of Congress will respond to that because they want praise. They want to be loved in their constituency. They want to be reelected. And they know being seen as a fighter against unpopular things in Washington is a good way to improve their reputation and get reelected. Leah, anything else on?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we're based on really simple principles. If you like the behavior, try to reward it. If you don't like the behavior, try to make sure that you let them know that you don't like it, right? Elected officials reward authentic speech. When people try to act like real human beings who seem to be genuinely horrified by what is happening, be there and be behind them. When people issue a extremely message tested press release and decline to do anything indicating that they think that we might be in the middle of a constitutional crisis, let them know how disappointed you are. Mm-hmm. That's the fundamental.
And maybe this is a good place to stop. And I know the team is waiting to come in and can finish up our strategy meetings here. But it is really not more complicated than what Leah just said. We live in this democratic republic still. Trump is trying to tear it down, but it's still a democratic republic. Power in a democratic republic is distributed across thousands of elected officials all across the country. And these elected officials are not given power. They are loaned power. And the process of loaning power is known as an election. That's what we do. We say, hey, borrow this power from us, the people, for a couple of years, you member of Congress. You can use it on our behalf for a little bit. And that member of Congress, you know what that member of Congress wants? They want to hold on to that power. That's what they want. They want to be lent that power again for another couple of years. And in between those elections, the way they gauge how to hold on to that power is what their constituents are telling them. It's nothing more complicated than that. So if you are there, if you are organizing, if you are focused on what they are doing, if you are looking over their shoulder and saying, good job, bad job, good job, bad job, they will adjust. They will adjust. That is our role over the course of the next 2 years, is to look over the shoulders of our elected officials and say, good job, bad job, good job, bad job. Go this direction, don't go that direction. What that means is we got to organize, we got to pay attention, and we got to be in rapid response mode to the chaos that Trump and his allies are putting on the table. But it's not that complicated. It's not much more than paying attention and saying your part and doing it with other folks in your own community. That is precisely what we did over the last 72 hours. And the Trump administration went from undermining the very foundational idea of our constitutional republic, that there's separation of powers, to saying, oh, never mind, we weren't actually going to do that. The way that went down was folks like you. I saw the results. 72% of the folks on this call called their senator this week. Folks like you, there we go, 72%. Folks like you called, your Democratic members yelled about it, your Republican members quietly were complaining about it, and the administration started to back off. Let's keep on doing it, y'all. We did it this week. We're going to do it next week. We're going to do it in March, and we're going to do it straight through to November of 2026. That's how we're going to fracture their coalition and retake power. We'll see you again next week, next Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern time. Thank you all. We will continue iterating. Please share your thoughts in the survey that we send out tomorrow. A transcript, a video, and a lot of links to resources, explainers, call scripts, etc., will be coming into your inbox tomorrow. Anything else?
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.